Okay. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Doing better at holding my existential dread at bay, creating boundaries between existential dread and me.
That's
I
great.
know, it's such good coping.
Yeah, well, me too. So we're in the same boat.
Yeah, how are you?
Good, good. Um, yeah, had so much fun watching this 3 hour movie last week.
Yes. All right. Well, I guess we'll just get into it then.
Yeah.
Do-do-do-do.
Nice.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 25, correct? 25
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
of the Mom and Eric podcast. It's our quarter century podcast episode.
Yeah.
So today we are going to talk about the movie Amadeus, which I had long recommended to Eric to watch. Probably he's not understanding why I recommended that he watch it. It's quite a long movie. It was made in 1984, and it was directed by Milos Forman. Milos Forman. I love saying Czechoslovakian names. There was this horrible, horrible Czechoslovakian dictator who I think was brought up in front of the International Hague Court for war crimes, but his name was Slobodan Milosevic, and I loved saying that name, Slobodan Milosevic. You'd have to say it like Slobodan Milosevic.
Mm.
Anyway, so this movie was made by Milos Forman.
That's
Milos.
like, well, I like singing the lyric of that song Cult of Personality, where he
Yes.
says like Kennedy, like Mussolini and Kennedy. I always
Yeah.
sing that. Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
song then.
Yeah. Exactly. Terrible names sometimes, but they just
Yeah.
sound really great. Like Slobodan Milosevic sounds really great. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, great name. Horrible
So,
guy. Great name.
yes. So Milos Forman is a very, very incredibly like storied director. In addition to directing Amadeus in 1984, he also directed One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he also directed Ragtime, which are two movies that I also saw around I mean, I think I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in college. But anyway, they're movies that really had a really powerful, all three of them, Ragtime, um, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then Amadeus had a really, really powerful impact on me back when I watched them decades and decades ago. So I recently, I think last year, Dad and I rewatched Ragtime, which I liked quite a bit. And then I didn't think I was going to rewatch Amadeus because it was so long. And I didn't know if I wanted to go through it again. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But I did end up rewatching it the other day and had some thoughts about my rewatch. But first of all, it's really the plot. Let me do the plot synopsis really quickly. It's about Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and it's about it's about him, but the central character is named Salieri, who is the court composer for Germany, I believe. And then, or Austria, whatever Germany was back then, Austria, Germany. I don't know if they were two separate countries back then or not. I think they were. But anyway, Salieri was the court composer, and he comes into contact with Mozart, and he's immediately astounded both by what a musical genius Mozart is, and also by what a boor Mozart is. B-O-O-R. B-O-O-R, boor.
Oh,
Not, I guess you could say
what
he's a
does that
B.
mean?
Boor, it means uncouth, really sort of coarse, vulgar, just really just in no way are you a refined person if you are a bore, B-O-O-R. So anyway, okay. So that's a plot synopsis. And I sense that by your 3.5 stars on Letterboxd that you were not that impressed by the movie.
That's not true. That's not
Okay.
true. I was
Okay. So,
impressed.
so why don't you start in terms of talking about what you thought of the movie?
I had zero clue what this movie was going to be about.
Uh-huh.
Um, and like upon learning it was about Mozart or like it involved Mozart, I was like more intrigued. But I really loved the beginning of this movie. I think like
Mhm.
they were setting up so many funny things and all the acting. Like so, I mean, I'm not impressed. It was it was just like,
That's like when people say, I don't disagree with you,
yeah.
meaning that they're not willing to say, I agree with you, but they don't want to say that they're, you know what I mean? Like it really is somewhere in the middle. It is like the 3.5 stars on
Yeah,
Letterboxd.
I know I'm gonna preface a lot of, I'll be prefacing this whole episode probably, but like, had I gone at like, like a Friday night at a bit crowded theater and watched this whole movie, maybe it would have just slightly improved my, you know, my experience of it. But I
Yes,
watched
can I just
this,
say I totally
yeah,
agree with you on that one.
yeah,
I think that this movie is meant to be immersive theater surround sound type of
yes.
experience.
Because
Yes.
that's what they were displaying also. Like all these
Yes.
operas were incredible, like and so well conceived. It's just they were so long, and also like they're all played out. And then, watching this on our home TV like on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon is like just man, I'm looking outside like, outside looks kind of nice. Like I kind of want to touch grass. But that's not to say that there weren't so many amazing things about this movie. Um, you know, I was really digging the whole setup. Like the fact that he was like a really old, decrepit, mentally, gone, composer that's like, "Oh, have you heard this tune?" And he's like, "No, no, I haven't. I don't know what that is." And it's like, "Oh, but you've heard this." Fucking God,
Yeah.
Um, and like it was so funny. The acting was really incredible.
Yeah.
The
You know that it won
characters.
Best Picture and then F. Murray Abraham won Best Actor for playing Salieri.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Tom
Wait,
Hulce
that's
was and Mozart the actor Tom Hulce who was nominated also was nominated for Best Actor. It won a ton of Academy Awards. It was a big deal.
yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Um,
And Milos Forman was like when in the interviews about it, he was like, "What the fuck? I didn't think that so many people would care about Mozart."
oh, that's great.
I,
Um, that's so ironic too, because the end, he's like, "I'm the king of mediocrity" or something.
yes,
Um,
yes.
which is so funny. Um,
Yeah. And he
yeah.
actually winning the Oscar changed his life, not in a good way. So
Oh,
I,
that sucks.
I know he just gave interviews for something. So I think he was in the second season of The White Lotus, and he gave a bunch of interviews around that time, and all he could talk about was how winning the Oscar for Amadeus really ruined him, because he got really full of himself. And
Oh,
there's so much
that's
irony. There's so much
so.
irony. There's so much irony there, right? He said that he got really full of himself because he won the Oscar. So in a sense, that
Ah,
whole like gnawing, like awful insecurity, that dogged him, that yearning to be great and throughout the entire movie, apparently really came back to bite him in real life.
yeah. Sorry, I know this is like not really on topic at all, but like when I watch interviews or any footage of Jeremy Strong,
Hmm.
yeah, like any, who plays Kendall
Yeah.
in Succession, like I'm watching Succession like, wow, he's such a great actor, like, and he's displaying this character so beautifully. But then in real life he's just the same person. So it's like, I know these actors draw there's actors that can just like kind of come up with something like entirely organic but not at all themselves.
Right.
But there's actors that kind of draw a little bit of just like who they are,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
which
think
is
F. Murray,
interesting.
yes, I had the same thought about F. Murray Abraham, that he's one of those actors who draws a little bit from himself.
Like Chris Evans is like somebody now I look at and I'm like, oh, he's a dork in real life. Like he's not
Yes,
some like
such
Chad.
a dork. He's
Um,
such a dork.
so yes, the acting was really great. I love the idea that Mozart is just like a fucking bumbling idiot. Like, and he just like music just comes to him and he just like knows how to, because I think like real artistic genius comes from that a lot of times. It's just
Oh,
like
interesting.
kind of just it's an enjoyment of their craft, and just like
Right.
they just do it. It just comes out naturally, whereas like other people just toil away like
Yes.
trying so hard to be something or be better, and a lot of times it just doesn't work like that.
Is that all you want to say about the movie?
Sure. I mean,
What
we'll
was
get
it?
into
What knowledge of classical music did you bring to it? Any?
it. No, zip. Okay, like I was waiting for those moments when they would play like the most iconic Mozart, compositions, which did come at the end, like that when he eventually dies. I was just expecting more, but I really just didn't know a single thing. Like I don't know what significance any of those plays or those operas had
Yes.
with the history of music or whatever. But
Yes.
I think like despite that I didn't know anything, like they very well compared um the two different like styles, like or what Mozart was interested in playing or composing versus what Salieri, right? That's
Salieri. Yeah.
Salieri. Like it's when I think the best scene of that is when Salieri makes that composition for the
The
emperor,
military,
and then
yeah, the
yeah,
welcoming march. Yes,
and
that's
then
one of my
and then
favorite
Mozart is
scenes.
just like, oh, I could just do a little, you know.
And
Um,
he's like, and he says like unintentionally insulting things like, this is just the same as what was played before.
yeah, yeah. Oh, it's just, I mean, it's just yours, but it's just a little, oh, yeah, a little better.
Yeah, it's just like he's like, this just repeats, so let's just make it a little better the second.
He's like, oh, it's just, I'm not really feeling this part. But what if we, yeah. So, but I still didn't understand any sort of musical element to it, really.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just kind of,
That raises a
boring.
point actually that I wanted to discuss a little bit before I get into my own feelings about the movie, both then and now. But favorite film critic Sarah said she was reviewing Maria, the new film by Pablo Larraín, and he has made these. This is like his trilogy of movies where he made a movie about Princess Diana, starring Kristen Stewart, and he made a movie about Jacqueline Onassis starring Natalie Portman, and now he made a movie about Maria Callas, who's the famous opera diva starring Angelina Jolie. And she made a really interesting point. I've seen none of these movies, and I'm not interested in seeing any of them at all, because I'm not interested in any of those figures. Although I do love Maria Callas, I will say. So anyway, the point that Sarah made was that that Pablo Larraín makes these films not based on any kind of historical record or true accounts of what happened. He makes his films based on a cultural idea of who Princess Diana was. And so therefore, in order for his, or like he doesn't, he has all sorts of like absurdist dreamlike sequences. Much of it doesn't follow a traditional narrative structure at all, his movies. And so she said that in order for his movies to work on the audiences and his lead actors have always been nominated for best actresses when they play those roles. Like Kristen Stewart got nominated and Natalie Portman got nominated, and now they think that Angelina Jolie is going to get nominated, right?
Oh wow.
And so Sarah said that for those kinds of movies to work, and this is why she wasn't sure if Maria worked for her. Um, you have to sort of depend on the cultural understanding that the audience is bringing to. So in other words, if you're putting out your this is how I interpreted this incredibly public figure, that so much gossip existed about them and so much, so many stories. There's a lot of salacious gossip about them. So if there's so much and you put forward your interpretation, then whether or not your interpretation succeeds depends on all the cultural understanding that your audience has of it. And so what's interesting to me is that I was wondering how you would react to this film having no cultural understanding of Mozart, like where he sits in the pantheon. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that to me was kind of an interesting question. And I think that that's an excellent point. I think that a movie, I know this is going to sound like a total digression, but a movie like Deadpool and
Yeah,
Wolverine
yeah.
only works if you're in on at least more than half of those in jokes. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in other words, a lot of your enjoyment of a movie depends on how in you are into the object or the subject of the movie, you
Hmm.
know? And I think that that's really interesting because it makes me wonder, it makes me wonder how I experience movies that I have no cultural understanding of, like not like, can I watch a movie that is so different than anything I've ever seen or immersed, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so anyway,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think a lot of those movies that, maybe they understand that people are coming in with no sort of knowledge about that sort of
right,
thing.
right.
They they maybe um feed you a little bit of like what that's all about, like in
Yes.
some way where they explain like
Yes.
basically
Without
how.
over explaining, right?
Yeah, and in a way that fits into the story. Like a lot of times, I mean, not a lot of times. I don't know why I'm saying that. It could be, through something like a character, one of the characters doesn't know, and is like
Yeah.
you, like
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
audience,
Yes, that's
and
right.
it's
That's
like the
right.
filter. So
That's right. Oh, that's a
yeah,
great point. Yeah. So there's ways that you can get around that lack of cultural understanding by actually making there's a character that serves as your perspective, or
hmm,
there's like some way that they do it without like getting too heavy-handed with the exposition.
yeah,
So that's a really great segue into what I thought of the movie the first time I watched it. So I did not Grandma and Grandpa, when I was growing up, had some classical music on, but not a lot. So I had definitely heard Mozart's work before. I had no familiarity with his operas. And actually, the funny thing is that after I moved to New York in my 20s and I actually saw a couple of his operas at the Metropolitan Opera, I actually think his operas are his worst pieces of work. I really think that they are his worst pieces of work. But by
versus
the
his
time
pieces of just music, like
his
composition.
symphonies and his concertos,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And so when I he actually at the beginning when Salieri is playing his compositions and the priest fails to recognize any of them, that scene, that one piece, dun 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 dun
yeah.
dun dun, that's a very famous Mozart
Oh
piece.
yeah,
Yeah, it's so so famous, and that's probably one of the first piano pieces I ever played on the piano.
yeah. And that's,
So
sorry, one second. Just like that's a testament to that whole moment, and
yes,
Mozart's influence. That like I came in with no sort of knowledge about him, but I did know that. Like I knew that, and
yes,
that also
yes.
played into the joke. So
Yes,
that's
that's
great.
right.
Yeah,
I know.
continue.
And the priest was like, "Yes, I totally recognize that." And he was like, "Yeah, that's not mine. That's not mine,
You wrote
dude."
that? Wow, just like crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy that you wrote
Um,
that. So anyway, again, this movie came out in 1984. That was 2 years before I graduated from high school. So therefore, I saw it at a very particular time in my life where I was not well steeped in classical music. I took a really interesting music 101, classical music 101 class in college, which actually lent so much to my understanding about where Mozart fits into the pattern. And so, there was like the first great genius of classical music was Johann Bach, Sebastian Bach, who created all these compositions for the church and was the first to sort of come up with a formal structure, like a like a full orchestra, like formal structure. And then you get into the Mozarts, and then the later ones are Beethoven. Like Beethoven came right on the heels of Mozart. And so Mozart was the first truly great, great, great classical music composer. And when you actually, I think that that is actually portrayed beautifully in the movie because in the movie where he's sick and dying at the end, and he's telling Salieri what to write down, like here's what the woodwinds will say, here's what the strings will say, like
yeah,
he has the entire frickin' orchestral score for the funeral requiem in his mind, and he's just like letting Salieri dictate it, which is crazy. Like that's crazy how unbelievably powerful that moment is if you know sort of the structure of doing orchestral composition. But anyway, so without having that deep classical music background at that point, that Amadeus knocked me on my ass when it came to its central theme. And it is because and I'll say this because I say this without regret because I'm past this point. At that stage in my life in high school, and especially this is like the right when I'm starting to apply to colleges and think about colleges, I had so many people telling me how talented I was, as a writer, like how talented I was as a thinker and a writer. I had like English professors and history professors like telling me, "Oh my God, you're so brilliant. Like you just see things. You're so insightful, blah, blah, blah. Like I can, we'll talk about a Shakespeare play and then she'll write this incredible essay. You know what I mean? Like, and so I wondered in my head if I was just okay or if I was like actually really, really like good, like if I was a good writer. And like if I was really talented, if I had sort of an artistic genius, like I did never thought of it like I was like, am I a genius? But I was like, can I at least like, am I super talented? That's what I was wondering. And Salieri's story was the first inkling that I got that people could do things like you could play a role like he was the frickin' court composer and yet when you run up against true genius, then it's unmistakable. Like it's unmistakable when you see it. And so that's one thing that was just profound for me. I was like, oh shit, like maybe I'm just an okay writer. And obviously, given how many books I had already read by high school, I sort of had it in my head like, oh my God, not only am I maybe just an okay writer, but there are probably like millions of other people who are better than me, you know? So, um, that that realization should not have been as I actually think that that's an important realization to have. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that it is an important realization to know where you sit in the world, and I actually don't think that that I don't think it should stop you from doing anything. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think that I think that if I had truly wanted to be a writer for a living, like write books, write novels, write screenplays, whatever, I should have kept on doing it regardless if I thought I was a genius or not. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But at that time, I was really kind of getting a little obsessed with the idea of failure, you know? And I just remembered that that time I had just read Death of a Salesman, which is this really incredible play. And it's a play about the central character is a failed salesman, and all he can think about, all he's obsesses about, is his failure to be a success. Like he fails the American dream. He fails to make money. He's not well thought of. He's not successful, you know. And he has these very fractured relationships with his sons. So anyway, my point is that at that time I was obsessed with failure, and Amadeus, I think, speaks really beautifully to that central theme, you know.
Yeah.
I can say a little bit more about that, but what do you think about that idea? And also, what do you think about that in relation to, I guess, how you thought about your own talent? Because in a lot of ways, you've also been given a lot of feedback that you're talented, that you're thoughtful, that you're good at what you do. But it doesn't seem to have created an existential crisis for you in terms of failure
Don't even
or
get me
fear of failure.
started, Mom. Oh, so many compliments about my talents.
Compliments, so compliments.
Um, I that's a really that's a lot to think about. I think that's so because you just completely put into perspective like seeing this at a different time in my life.
Yeah.
Because right now it just kind of doesn't I feel in the sense where it hit you at a point where maybe it helped you see something differently.
Yeah.
At this point, I feel like I've sort of passed that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
and
That's we'll talk about that. What do you mean by
yeah,
that?
well, by like, you know, I in middle school and then like in the beginnings of high school, I felt like I was doing everything like myself. Like, everything when I was learning about editing and making videos and then learning and then starting to learn about film, I was like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And because I like doing all this stuff and I want to be doing all of this.
Right.
But then and then when once I started actually doing films was when like I realized I couldn't do that because I really needed other people. So once I learned about collaborating with other people and
Yeah.
then like seeing how much more rewarding that is
Yeah.
when you do something, together with people are like-minded or, also very talented, um it just kind of completely changed everything. I mean, that's not just in like work and stuff, but like life. And so I let go of any sort of kind of idealistic, like, dreams. I know that
Yay.
sounds like bad, but like, what if I want to do
No,
those?
it's not that you let go of ideal. Maybe you just learn to value something else more.
Yes, exactly. Like, and if valuing that, brings along all this other stuff that I would maybe want to do, sure, great, But now I know what I really care about, so kind of all this other stuff is just a little trivial.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, I think that's like coming from a place of privilege because I can just like um care about, people and things and not have to worry about like um, making rent, stuff like that.
I think that's
Yeah.
a great way of putting it. You know, I think that you let go of this idea of making your own stuff. You know, what's interesting is that when we went to visit USC, you know, in advance of your, you know, college process, I definitely got the whiff when I was at USC, that that was a place that really wanted turn out the next auteur. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
you see like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, up on the just giant, letters. And then you
Yeah.
keep on hearing again and again that Ryan Coogler, this is where Ryan Coogler went to USC. And so then you get the idea that filmmaking is like, ooh, like who's going to be the next auteur? Who's going to be the next?
Yeah.
And yet, what's interesting to me about that is that those are some very like sort of very that's a very auteur driven like one person individualistic view of filmmaking, and yet one of the most brilliant filmmakers that I think working today, as you know, is Denis Villeneuve, and everything you hear and see of him, he's constantly giving away credit to like everybody
Yeah.
else. Like every interview
Yeah.
I've seen him, he's talking about how great his actors are, how great his crew is, how great everything, his cinematographer, his composer, everything. So what's interesting is that Mozart, Amadeus, that movie, it pokes holes and it both reinforces that idea of the individual auteur, but it also talks about how complicated that view is, and so Mozart really did try to do everything on his own. Like he was very egotistical and quite selfish, and he completely believed that he was a genius. He was
Yeah.
kind of an asshole, even though he was charming at the same time.
Yeah.
But I just think that that's a really interesting view that you came to value collaboration so quickly over sort of making your own stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
putting
I
your own.
mean, because I took the first kind of failings of like trying to do things that way and then failing and then being like, well, what was the, like what was the point,
Yes,
Um, and if I could have just gone deeper down, like, oh, I just need to be better, or I just need to
right.
like improve my talents. Like, no, that's stupid.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's not very healthy. And
But a
I,
lot of the directors you worked with in school were that obsessed with their own vision.
I mean, to choose to like want to direct in school and then
Yes.
want to do it after, like you have to have that sort of,
Yes. You have to be
um,
driven by your own vision. Like you have to be
yeah.
kind of a dick
It's
about it.
yeah, and it's I was going to just say like because I just naturally compare myself to these people or like anybody who's in some sort of like famous position or whatever who has done something like remarkable.
Right.
Uh, like I end up inevitably comparing myself, but at the end of the day, it's like if it's not me, then why? If it's not for me and it doesn't feel like it's for me, like why bother? Like I have to be who I am, and that's like all that matters at the end. So seeing Mozart and Salieri in this movie like kind of come up against those failings, like just because
Yes.
they care so much about music and
Yes.
making impactful, stuff. Like they both had their own incredibly deep issues. So
Yes. Very,
um
very deep issues.
and
Yes.
and thank God it's not me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yes,
So
yes. So that's the impact that the movie had on me back then, and I got over it. I don't think that I was as clear as you are. I don't think I would have been able to articulate when I got over it, like when I got over this idea that okay, I'm not a genius. Maybe the idea is to just do well. Do you know what I mean? Like do the best, put my best effort forward at whatever I happen to be doing at a given time. I do sometimes wonder if that shortchanged my own creativity. Like I do sometimes wonder like why I was not given that single-minded obsession to pursue
yeah,
like a vision or a book or something. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
so I think about that, but then nowadays, especially as old as I am now, I just kind of shrug and be like, it just didn't work out that way, And I did some really good things in my
yeah,
career, and I did some really good things in my life, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm really
yeah,
proud. I mean, I'm really proud of multiple little things and maybe some bigger things.
yeah.
Anyway,
I it's because we assign a lot of importance to like important, movies and
yes.
books, writing, like, art. Like art is very important and it's like
Yeah.
something we all, if you are an artist, like you have to admire these things and then also like see yourself kind of participating in that. And that's a lot of pressure, but a lot of the times it's like these things only come about because people were being true to themselves and whatever they were going through to make this sort of like piece. So
Yes.
the sort of And retrospectively, anybody once they make that sort of thing can just be like, well, I was thinking about the future of
Yeah, yeah,
like, race and like this country. It was just like weighing on me so much I had to make this. It's like, okay, like sure. It just
yeah.
I don't know. It could just be anything.
Yes, yeah.
So
You know, what's really interesting, by the way, what I think about when I think about genius is I think about how, so I think that there's an old saying that says genius is one of the most demanding mistresses you can possibly have. And but I think that,
that sounds like a patriarchal saying.
yes, it does in some ways, but at the same time, it applies in terms of both what Mozart was trying to do. Like Mozart, like was a genius, and he just wanted everybody to recognize what a genius he was. And then for the oddest reason, just now when I was thinking about this, Eric, I was actually thinking about how much I loved the movie Moonlight and Barry Jenkins, and also what a nice guy he reputedly is, and how bummed I am that he's putting out
That he's
this new
doing it Mufasa.
Mufasa. Like,
Oh
I almost
man.
want to write him a letter like, Dear Barry, why
Oh,
did you have to do this? Why did
that
you have
is
to
a
commit to Mufasa?
that is a knife to my ugh. Hey, I mean, it's not even out. Who knows? I mean, is it out? No. I mean, well, maybe it's good.
Because I think that Moonlight is a definitive statement on race and class and repression in society and circumstances. I think it is, and it does it with so few words. It just does it with so much beauty and so much like honesty. And now he's making, so I think that Barry Jenkins is a genius. I think he's a genius, and now he's making Mufasa. But anyway, back to Amadeus. That's what I was thinking of. Anyway,
Hmm.
um, so
Yeah, back to
seeing this
Amadeus.
movie, yes, seeing this movie now, I really felt the lack of the theatrical experience. And I
Yeah.
think that the movie is this is one of those movies that's absolutely supposed to be shown in a theater, played on the theater sound system. And in particular, I want to talk about some of the things I think it did really well that didn't play well as well when you're just watching it on TV.
Mhm.
So I think that the movie does a really good job of uncovering the true genius of how much of a genius Mozart was. And the first inkling of that you get, not just when the priest recognizes his composition at the very beginning, but it's when Mozart's wife, Constanza Stanzi, comes to and tries to convince Salieri to vouch for Mozart to teach the emperor's niece music. And so she brings this whole folder of compositions. That's a beautifully staged scene, by the way. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so fraught in so many ways. And as in particular, the thing that I remember so vividly from that scene, and I only seen Amadeus once, the first time before seeing this rewatch, but I remembered how incredibly delighted and greedy she was to like eat those little bonbons that he offered her, and that how she surreptitiously like took another one and like started, she just like reached for it and grabbed it. But then when he dropped the folder full of his compositions, he's leafing through them and he's just looking at the notes, and they are playing the snippets of Mozart's compositions as he's leafing through them. And even those snippets and the way that they show that, like he's just leafing through it and it's paced so beautifully so that the incredible, at that point, Salieri cannot, despite the fact that he thinks that Mozart is so uncouth and so vulgar, when he looks at those notes on a page in that scattered like folder of compositions, he's blown away. And that is what I would consider to be a true cinematic moment. But you need you need you can't be watching it on your TV. You actually need those notes to hit you like from all angles, so that you're sitting there going, because even now, like from the score of Amadeus, I can sort of hear one of his famous compositions where he goes da 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 da. Like I can still hear it, but that's because the notes have been embedded in my cultural consciousness deeply, but it doesn't play well in a TV streaming theater experience.
So in your viewing, you like it
That's
didn't change your kind of opinion of the movie, but it just
no.
like it dampened your experience of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it totally dampened my experience of it. Yes, I just remember I just remember in the first time I was like when Salieri was I remember feeling the recognition of genius by those snippets of notes at the same time that Salieri was feeling it. Like,
Hmm.
oh, fuck. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I will just say is that the the scenes where they play the opera and they play the opera, they play his compositions, they seem to take forever when you're
Yes.
watching it on
Yeah.
streaming. But if you are in a movie theater, a dark movie theater, and that music is just, enveloping you, that's a completely different experience. So that's
Yeah.
a real bummer. You
Yeah.
think it
I
could have
mean,
been cut?
holistically, like my experience with the movie was like it was just like this is really funny in the beginning, and then
Yeah,
and then I'm
it just
like
went on and
and
on
then
and
I was
on.
checking how much longer. It's like, oh, 45 more minutes. Oh, 20 more minutes. We got it, you know? Um, like, I mentioned the acting. Uh, it was so comedic. All the conversations they had in the beginning were so like, they're all trying to be prim and proper, and then
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mozart comes in and is like, well, I don't know. And his laugh. Oh my God.
I know.
Mozart's laugh so funny. Like that's such a funny quirk to add to this like person who's supposed to be a genius. Um, and you know, like also they had that actor who I immediately recognized from Ferris Bueller. The
Yes, he was great as the
Yeah,
emperor.
and
Yes, I looked him up too. Jeffrey Johns, I think his name is, or
yes,
Jeffrey. Yeah,
he's so funny. He's
he's
like
so funny.
he has the perfect
Uh-huh.
he has the perfect blend of like idiocy and
Yes,
being peeved like
yes, yes,
so and he communicated that in Ferris Bueller too but like I didn't get enough of him in
yes.
this movie like they s- they sort of sprawled into just like opera after opera at a certain point where I thought it was interesting that the audience was not enjoying Mozart's but like the audience was kind of liking Salieri's
Right.
in comparison. But and then Salieri was secretly like watching Mozart's plays and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And I love that. And then they also abandoned the whole him talking to the priest at a certain point. Like they had been establishing like okay, we're gonna keep coming back to this.
right.
So it's sort of like a B story like that they're kind of that they have, and then they kind of just like let it go.
I agree that they let it go, but I think that that was on purpose. I think that Mozart's descent into madness and Salieri's descent into gnawing jealousy, where it brings about he. So first of all, the whole thing about Salieri saying that he killed Mozart is Salieri is the most unlike I did not remember him being quite as unlikable as this time around. This time I thought that he was like the worst character ever, the worst, most unlikable character ever for many, many reasons, which I will list in a second. But one of the reasons I think that he wanted to be egotistical about something, so he claimed that he brought about, and he definitely helped push it along, Mozart's downfall. He definitely uses influence to prevent his operas from being played or from having a long run, etc. But overall, I don't think that Salieri is as big a deal as he thinks he is in his mind in terms of how much he had to do with that. But I think that the whole movie, that loss of the B plot, I think the whole movie, Eric, is supposed to be immersive. I think it's supposed to
Yeah,
be like relinquish yourself to the experience, and the experience that you're in the latter part of that movie, the latter part of those 3 hours,
yeah,
is that you are with Mozart on his downward spiral, and it's like chipping away little by little, and you're descending into madness. And
yeah,
actually, the most similar structure that I can think of that's very similar to that type of loss of a B plot is in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon,
mm.
where suddenly you are wondering
Yeah,
who is this
yeah.
mysterious young person, and then you see her entire backstory. Like
Yes.
there's an entire hour of the movie where you're off on the desert plains with her,
Yeah.
and you see how, yeah, okay, so and there's no like you're like, okay, weren't we talking about a sword? Like, wasn't there like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's a perfect example of that. And again, Crouching Tiger, great movie to see in the theater, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
So,
true. I would probably like the theatrical cut a lot more. Like,
yes, I agree.
and I saw somebody else had a similar opinion. Um,
It was a director's cut. Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
They're overindulgent.
yes. And they could bring it back, and I know the death scene brought that back, and the him, being wheeled through the mental facility, like
Yes.
that it all kind of brought that back for like a good finish.
Yeah.
Just that whole middle section, I just couldn't, I just can't. I couldn't sit through. And I guess
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
because of all those things.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought the director's cut was a little overindulgent, and I think that they played the opera much longer in the director's cut than they did in the.
But it would be different if I had some more context, if I knew what the studied truth was,
Yes.
or if I knew what the operas were about, like what was going on in front of me, then I'd be like more interested in the story. But it's such a nowadays it's like movies overstimulate, us
Yes.
with dazzling colors and beautiful all this stuff. And the music, it sounds like I'm just like this movie's old and
No, no, no. I
but
think it
you
was
know,
dated in many ways, actually.
yeah, and the
I think the
first,
production values are very dated. Like,
yeah,
I thought that the whole lighting was really flat. And I think that these days, in these days of with more modern filmmaking techniques, I actually think that the whole all the interior scenes in the court, I think that they would be lit and shot very differently.
yeah,
So I think that they would be lit and shot. Like, you know what they would, you know what they would probably be done like? They'd probably be done more like a Yorgos Lanthimos type of aesthetic, where you have the colors being super saturated, so that you would have more life and vibrancy inside of the court. But I thought that the lighting was super flat. I thought it was a very 80s looking movie.
somebody also picked up on the dynamic between Salieri and Mozart being like SpongeBob and Squidward. Oh my God. That's literally what they're like, especially with music because Squidward plays the clarinet and he sucks. Like it's just and then the laugh too. It all kind of syncs up. So it's like why do I love and respect SpongeBob this show? Like it's like, oh, this is true art. This is and then like Amadeus, I'm just like, it's okay. It was good.
No, actually, but I actually thought about that very theme about high art versus low art. I read a lot of critical theory in college that basically said that distinctions between high art and an art that's made for mass consumption
Yeah,
are meaningless, because
yeah,
they're actually designed to reinforce um, hegemonic structures.
true. Yeah,
So basically, they're saying that if you say that something's just cheap and vulgar or like just made for the masses, and that somehow devalues it somehow, you're basically just upholding a class system that is
yeah.
unjust and inequitable. So I actually think it's a very fair comparison to
No, it
compare
is. Yeah,
to compare SpongeBob and Squidward, and to say that you found more. Validity in SpongeBob and Squidward than you
yeah.
did in Amadeus,
Well, it's funny because even in SpongeBob, it's like people. I was more introduced to this
By the
in
way,
college. Yeah,
by the
sorry.
way, there is an episode of SpongeBob that is dead on for Amadeus. It is the one where SpongeBob is doing art and Squidward wants so badly
Yeah,
to be a
yeah, yeah,
great
yeah, yeah,
artist.
yeah. That's the perfect one. Yeah,
It's like how do you
the
draw? How do
circle.
you draw a circle? And he goes,
Well,
"Oh, I just
well,
draw
I
this
draw
hole."
this entire portrait, and then I just erase some stuff, and then here we go. We're at the base level, and then we have a perfect circle.
It's so great.
Um, that's hilarious. Yeah, something that people point out with SpongeBob is like, how Squidward is a representation of like, the capitalist like, worker who like doesn't get paid and like, is just forced to work, and then SpongeBob is like the kind of, you know, whatever. Say they put like societal sort of
Yeah,
umbrellas on top of it. And
I
I
totally
wish
buy it.
I wish I was able to do that more with Amadeus because more indulgent in the characters kind of story would have been more entertaining, but it wouldn't have been kind of the story they were telling. It's just would have been different. Like
Yes.
because the one they had was like about what they both cared about, which is the music, I feel like.
Yes. That's right.
Um
It was all about the music.
yeah, which I
Yeah.
which I respect. It's just like
Yeah. Just
couldn't
wasn't that compelling for you.
no, it wasn't that compelling. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But and then last, I found Salieri to be so much more unlikable this time around. And in particular, one thing that really stuck out to me, which is something that you and I have talked about, is the scapegoating of God for his own
Mm.
lack of talent. So he's continually talking to God and saying that it is the greatest injustice that God made him appreciate and recognize genius while not giving it to him himself. And I was sitting there thinking about the conversations you and I have had about using God as a justification. And I was just like, why do you have to blame some dude? Like, you have to blame some deity
Yeah.
for your lack of genius. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe it just turned out that you're just not a genius, and
Yeah.
somebody else is. And so maybe that's just like, I think that I just accept more sort of I have more of a fatalistic view of society or fatalistic view of human character, which is that you're given what you're given and you just got to make the best of it. You know what I mean? And then what's the point of always comparing yourself to somebody else because you're never going to be like anybody else. That's the whole point, is that we are only given what we're given. And all of us are special to some people and not at all special to other people. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I guess my point is that I don't see I Salieri is um, the worst thing I think that he has as his character trait, his worst character trait is his obsession, with what he doesn't have versus what he does have. Like by all appearances, he has a fine life. Like he's the court composer, for the emperor, and
Yeah.
so
This
he's the
movie was
official
making
court.
me think about how fucking rich people lived during those days. Like it's crazy.
It's
Like their
crazy. Yes.
outfits, their places where they like it's just they were living the high life.
They really
Um
were. Yes.
so it's insane that he could still find, so many issues like
Yes.
personally and like, he could have easily been like a disciple or
Yes.
like
Well,
just
or
a learner, a curious learner,
that's
like
right. Or he could
he's
just be
why is he like this? What, and then he could have learned
right.
something about it, but instead he was obsessed.
He's how can I say he also could just he could just be basking in appreciation is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if I it's how can I say this? Like you and I, how we feel about our favorite filmmakers, or our favorite artists, or we think that way about, I mean, I felt that way about paintings that I've seen too. I don't sit there and think, oh God, I really wish I could do that. I really wish that God had given me that. I never think that. I never, all I can think about is I'm so grateful that this person is on earth and they were able to produce something that moved me so deeply, like that moved me so, so deeply. And so I think that appreciation is the one is like it's the most defining lack of a quality that Salieri has. He's ultimately just a super he's just ultimately so puffed up with his own importance. He thinks he killed Mozart. He thinks that he should have been great like Mozart. He thinks that God screwed up in giving Mozart the talent. And that the last thing I'll say that's really kind of interesting, and I'm not super harsh on Salieri about this, but I think that his shock at finding out how vulgar and goofy Mozart was made me think about what we expect um, of the people that we revere and admire for their talent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I actually think that there is a kernel of truth in there. I think that when you really admire somebody's music or their art, you kind of want them to be a good person. Like you want them to like it's just how you feel when you see an interview with somebody, who you really admire, and then you find out in the interview that they're super great. Like they say really articulate, thoughtful things versus like, oh, they came off as kind of a dick. So I'm not really as into them anymore. And so, an example of this, by the way, is that, Keanu Reeves has become almost universally beloved as a celebrity. And the reason is because people who encounter him in daily life, he's just lovely. Like he's just this very sweet, lovely person. And everybody's talking about, Zachary Levi, you know, because he came out as a Trump supporter and he said that it would kill his, career. And number one, it wasn't that big of a deal. He didn't have that big of a career.
Nobody gives a shit about
Nobody gives
Zachary
a
Levi.
shit. And then the second thing is that his co-stars are coming out and saying, yeah, he was always a jerk. Like it's
Uh,
like he was always a jerk. And
that's
so
that's the Shazam guy, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the adult Shazam.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that there were so many unlikable characteristics, but the expectations of how we want our artists to behave, I actually think that that
Yeah.
was probably the truest of all, is that you're so disappointed. Like, how can somebody be such a genius and yet at the same time, like, behave in such a vulgar and also arrogant way? Because Mozart was kind of arrogant. He was very egotistical. So he thought that he was the best, maybe because he
Yeah. I
was.
a line I a line I really loved about that was when Mozart was like, I think it was Mozart that he pointed this out, who was like, "Why are you all making operas about gods
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
legends and like, who gives a fuck about that?"
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
and he's writing about like, what, prostitutes and like women and
Yeah.
like and stuff
In a
that like
brothel. It was set in
a
a
brothel.
brothel.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
and the things that are seen as like not respectful or dignified or whatever. Like, I think that was a really true like uh, it was such a nice thing to hear when seeing them wear wigs and all these outfits and like in these rich palaces and shit like that, the average person doesn't give a shit about, so
Yes. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
So overall, my second viewing of the movie did not take away from what I had from the impact it had had on me. But I will say that I think that Amadeus is undeniably a movie that needs to be seen in the theater.
Yeah,
And also, I think that you were hampered both by the lack of a theatrical experience and then also by your lack of a cultural context.
yeah.
And I think it's a completely fair point to say that Squidward and SpongeBob are a much better representation of this theme for you. Like
Mm.
that works better for you than Amadeus because that is the medium in which you first came to understand those themes, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
So that's just the medium. That's the one that works for you, you know.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I would just say that even though it was a little bit of a slog to get through, I would I would end on this point was I think that Milos Forman is a great director. I think he's a great director. I think that the three films of like Ragtime and he's also made others. He made The Man on the Moon, which is this very famous film about Andy Kaufman, who was sort of a legendary comedian and actor,
yeah,
and Jim Carrey played him. But I think that Milos Forman is amazing because I think that he has a quality that I think is shared by Alfonso Cuarón. And in both Y Tu Mama Tambien and in Roma, this it's a quality of just letting the story unfold in front of you.
yeah, yeah,
And so you don't feel like the director is being overly obtrusive or um, he's just trying to share the story with the central theme and tell it as simply as possible and let the actors do their job with really great performances. And so, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is it's a guy who's committed to inpatient psychiatric care. And it's his experience as being in the inpatient psychiatric ward. And so many people told me that that movie was disturbing. And when I watched it, I was like, oh, this is actually not disturbing. It's got so many elements. It's just like Amadeus. It's got elements of comedy and tragedy and sadness and like shock and awe in it, you know? And so I actually think that I think that Milos Forman is a really great. Ragtime is the same way. Both of those movies, by the way, I would love for you to see them, but I think that both of them are also meant for the theatrical experience. You know, you would find both of them to be slow and the pacing at times you'd be like, what's going on here? Because his style of filmmaking is what I would call immersive storytelling, which is similar to Alfonso Cuarón, you know. I mean, You Two Mama Tambien doesn't did you see that movie? You Two Mama
yeah.
Tambien? It did not have a straightforward trajectory, you know? Like you had a long time sort of like, what's going on here? Like these two boys are friends. Wait, they're going on a road trip. They're going to look for, you know what I mean? Like there was all these little hints of something going on, but that's like a very immersive movie, you know? And
Hmm.
but I think that Quara might be stronger on the visuals so that you're more captivated as you're watching it, you know? But
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of the filmmakers who are into that type of immersive storytelling because they make me work a little bit harder to to bring meaning to it, you know? And it's a really good counterpart to the more obvious films that I like. I mean, the reason why I
yeah,
love movies like John Wick and The Equalizer is
yeah,
because they're
yeah.
so straightforward.
They're so
Like
straightforward.
evil thing, boom, boom.
Anybody
You
can
know,
get
like
it.
you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's this opposite end of the spectrum, which is there's like the John Wick Equalizer, and then there's a spectrum of like I'm just going to show you a story. I'm going to let you roll. I'm not going to hurry up about it. I'm just going to show you these characters, and then I'm going to let you draw your own conclusion. So I'm a huge fan of that. And overall, I think that my reverence for Milos Forman like remains pretty intact. So
Yeah.
also in reading interviews with him, he's just got a fascinating life. So
Hmm.
a really, really fascinating life. So
Yeah.
His parents were concentration camp survivors. And then also he talked about all the different elements of filmmaking that he loved. Just sounded like but the one funny thing that made me laugh though is that they asked him what his favorite part of the filmmaking process was, and he said editing.
Hell yeah.
He said he
He's
loves editing
right.
the most.
He's right. Funny that I didn't see that really displayed in the director's cut, but you know what? Great.
I know, I know,
I'm
I
just kidding.
know. It's that whole thing about the overindulgence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I deeply respect this movie. And I'm really glad I saw it because now if I saw it playing in a theater, I would jump to go see it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think I agree with you. I like the spectrum of movies where things that are because my favorite stuff is just super simple
Yes.
and hooks me um based on those just simple like core story points or characters. But I do like films that just kind of unfold.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking about Enora, like that's Enora was a lot like that. But I think maybe sort of the distance of the subject or whatever maybe got in the way of that.
Yeah.
But in this case, in Amadeus's case, it was just my distance to the subject,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
my kind of like because I really haven't watched that many period pieces like that. We were just talking about Little Women the other day and how I haven't seen the original, but the newer one like was that period piece. But it wasn't anything amazing from what I remember. But it was the first time, one of the first times I just like visibly could recognize like filmmaking techniques being utilized for story purposes. Like it was just kind of laid out in front, you know, because people didn't weren't into like the time jumping and stuff.
Yeah.
But that was the first time I saw, oh, they have costume changes for you know different time periods. Oh, it's colored differently. Like
Yeah.
like that stuff is important. And yeah, to be completely honest, I wasn't despite how amazing the production was, like of Amadeus, like and all the acting and costumes and everything, like I wasn't struck by the visuals like
Yeah,
that
no, no.
much.
I actually think the visuals come down to bad lighting, I have to tell
Yeah,
you. Like I think everything looked very flat to me, you
yeah.
know? But I think that some scenes were staged incredibly well. And
Stage,
so,
yeah.
yeah, some scenes were staged incredibly well. I thought that the scene at the end where his body was thrown into a pauper's grave, into this mass grave. I
Hmm.
thought that that was done really, really well. And then I thought that the scene, with Salieri and Stanzi in the study was done really, really well.
I'm so glad you brought up the staging because that is so important. Like I am visibly just like remembering, you know, the theater, like where they would do the operas and
Hmm.
then, you know, where the emperor was when he was sitting on the piano and how Mozart would be let in, you know, and with the guards and stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
he was like peeking around.
yeah, yeah. And that's like it's so much more visually and emotionally like interesting to experience versus I just saw Wicked and like honestly I don't think they really had that. Like it's
Yeah,
like it was just like all right, they're gonna sit here and then they're gonna run over here and do this song.
yeah.
And they're gonna run back.
Sarah said the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're gonna run upstairs. You know, it's
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
or
yeah,
they're gonna run
yeah.
around the room. Like that'll be really interesting, right? It's not like purposeful.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that's a really great element of
Yes, and staging to me is different than production design. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think
yes.
that the scenes were blocked really well, and I think that they were paced really well, but that they didn't look gorgeous. So, how can I say this? Well, I don't think you could redo it actually, because you'd have to get that incredible set of actors again. But if you were ever to redo Amadeus with like a truly great art director, for example, then you could see, and then you'd still have the music being Mozart. I just think that it would be so incredible, But
Yeah.
I think Amadeus is in a sense lightning in the bottle because I don't think that anyone would ever greenlight a movie like that again, And
Yeah.
actually, and Milos Forman said that he was like, I can't believe I got this movie greenlit. I can't believe I got it made. He's like, I can't believe I got any of my
Yeah.
movies made. I mean, all of the movies that he makes are. They're not what you would call popular hot topics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're really obscure. I mean, Ragtime was based on an E.L. Doctorow novel that many people consider to be unadaptable, and it's really about a very specific piece of history of race relations, and it depicted like relationship between black and white people around the turn of the century in America and how incredibly messed up it was, you know? And
Hmm.
so anyway, all right. So I'm so glad you saw the film, even though
Great recommendation.
it wasn't super compelling. And I also think it's good for us every once in a while to, as you know, I really like, sometimes I hate to get into this mindset, but I do get into this mindset. Sometimes I think that there are must-watch directors for you, you
Oh,
know?
totally.
Like
Yeah.
I think that there are
Why
directors that you
why do you
have to
hate
go,
that?
because I think that, again, I don't think those are the only directors worth seeing. I don't like to think about that. Like
No, no.
yeah, I mean, I don't know who directed SpongeBob, and I think that's a great piece of work. You know what I
You
mean?
mean
So
well, Hillenberg created it. I mean, like that's true. That's like actually that is a good point. Animation, I feel like sometimes loses a lot of the creators or the directors because there's not
yes,
much like in real life, like kind of attachment. Like there's
yes,
with in-person stuff, there's like real actors you can kind of latch onto and stuff. But I think that's totally valid. I mean, in your perspective, it's just like he made a film that impacted you at a certain point. Like that that's already like something that's worth seeing a director's movies for, I think.
yeah. It's so funny. A lot of people, in terms of making a film that impacted you, a lot of people bring that up in relation to Gladiator, you know?
Yeah.
So a lot of the interviews for Gladiator 2, they've said, you know, to like Paul Mescal and others, Pablo, no, Pedro Pascal, they'll say, you know, how do you remember where you were when you first saw the first
The first
Gladiator,
Gladiator.
which I didn't think was that special of a movie, but they all talk about it like it was as impactful for them
My
as
yeah.
Amadeus was for me, you
Yeah,
know?
my
And so,
coworkers say it's like in their top 10 movies of all
yes,
time, which
yes.
I just I don't understand that. But I'm
I
sure
don't
it was pretty
understand
crazy. I'm sure it's pretty
that.
crazy when it came out.
Yes.
Um,
But
but
Ridley Scott, who made both the first Gladiator and the second one too, but he also made Blade Runner. I mean,
really?
dudes will
Blade
talk.
Runner and Alien? Damn.
Yes, Alien, Blade Runner, and um,
Wow.
Gladiator.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, people revere Ridley
Yes.
Scott in the same way, and like more so even, especially like dudes will say, we'll talk about Ridley
They
Scott.
do.
And I don't think about Milos Forman often, but when I do, I think to myself, I think about this trio of movies and what an impact they had on me because
Yeah.
they told a story that was unfamiliar to me, and they told it really well because they let me bring my own judgment to it, you know? And so I have the greatest respect for Milos Forman. And again, I love saying his name. So anyway, I'm glad we did this
I
one.
love hearing his name. It's
So
I
then
kind of like it.
we should have a whole bunch of Oscar contenders to watch, but I'm not sure which one we're going to get to.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, for our
Well,
next
either
episode.
way, let's record the next one in person
We should record the next one in
and
person.
whatever we decide will I'm sure it'll be great.
Maybe we'll go see it together.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yay.
When
Oh,
you're
I'm
home.
excited. Yeah,
All
I'm so
right.
excited.
All right. All right. Thanks to all of our listeners who are sticking with us, even though they're not going to click on this episode because it's so old,
Ah,
such an old movie.
I don't know. I said to my boss we were going to be talking about this and he was like, "Oh, great movie. Just like a great piece. You need to yeah, you definitely need to watch that, you
Oh,
know."
interesting.
So,
All right.
yeah, thanks Tim.
All right. I love you, Eric.
Okay, love you too.